Okay, so looking at the birth of the Republican Party, and we've discussed this a little bit in class, the reason the Republican Party is born is essentially a anti-slavery, free soil party. And, the Whigs, after losing the election of 1852, they're as a party, they are pretty much finished. Now, there will be kind of vestiges of the Whigs still out there, like Abraham Lincoln, who was a former Whig. But as a group, they're going to split, and they will kind of drift into different parties. And of course, a lot of them will make up part of the base of the Republican Party. You also have the Know Nothing Party, which were nativists who were anti-foreign and anti-Catholic. But even the Know Nothing Party will be split over the issue of slavery, more along kind of the balance of seats in Congress. You also have the Free Soil Party, which will nominate Millard Fillmore as kind of a lackluster candidate. And this party, of course, is based around the premise that slavery should not extend into the territories. And what you have are kind of a mishmash of these people who come together and form the Republican Party. And you kind of read about the Republican Party platform. We've talked about Abraham Lincoln clarifying that platform during kind of the address to Stephen Douglas. And so what we have is in 1856, Franklin Pierce, who is pretty much on his way out. And we talked about Pierce, so we understand that Pierce was just kind of spineless. He was wishy-washy, just wasn't a very strong candidate. Not to mention that Pierce had just a number of personal issues that he was dealing with. And so the Democrats are going to look to James Buchanan, who had been a minister overseas. And that meant Buchanan didn't really have any sort of history with the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which was kind of the flashpoint for this election, and the issue of slavery. Buchanan pretty much was nominated simply for the fact that he just really didn't have a whole lot to do with any of it. The Republicans, on the other hand, are going to nominate John C. Fremont. And John C. Fremont, kind of a soldier / adventurer, was also Catholic, which was going to be held against him, is going to represent the idea that slavery should not spread into the territories and that slavery, morally speaking, is wrong. The problem is that Fremont is kind of a wild card. He's just not your average politician like Buchanan was. And so, you have this brand new party, and it's almost like it's just kind of growing pains. People just aren't necessarily sure whether or not to vote for the Republican Party or what the Republican Party is about, but they see Fremont as kind of ahead of that, and for some people they just are not quite willing to make that leap yet, and they want to settle for someone who's not going to rock the boat, and that's Buchanan. The Whigs and the Know Nothings kind of form an alliance. They're going to nominate Millard Fillmore, and Buchanan is going to win with 45% of the popular vote. So it's not a particularly overwhelming election for Buchanan, and that's a pretty big deal because the Republican Party was pretty much brand new. And so that really kind of gave the Republican Party a massive boost, and perhaps people who didn't actually know what the Republican Party was about now knew, hey, this is a new party, that this is what they stand for, and it was kind of setting the stage for the next election, and kind of setting the stage for Abraham Lincoln, of course, to kind of take the reins there. So now you have James Buchanan as President of the United States, and Buchanan, as stated, it has just gone down in history as one of the worst presidents in the history of the country. He doesn't want to rock the boat. He doesn't want to make decisions. He wants to appease everybody. And at a time where the country was kind of at a flashpoint, this is not the person you wanted in office. You wanted someone who would take a stand, someone who would preserve the Union, and Buchanan is just not that person. Meanwhile, in Kansas, you have the Lecompton Constitution that is brought up, and we talked about this. And basically, the pro-slavery government, which was based in Lecompton, remember you have two governments at the same time in Kansas. They write up a constitution, and there were kind of two versions. One protected slavery, and the other did not. But the one that did not allow for slavery in Kansas still protected it with a clause that basically said those who were already in the Kansas territory would be, and brought slaves with them, would be allowed to keep them because they were property. Buchanan is going to support the Lecompton Constitution. The Free Soilers will vote it down. Now, what happens is that Stephen Douglas, he doesn't necessarily think that this is popular sovereignty. He wants to see this redone, and so they will have a referendum, and it'll be a population vote on the Lecompton Constitution. It's voted down again. Northern Democrats, see that Douglas, called for this referendum, and they say Douglas is a hero. Southern Democrats, on the other hand, claim that he's a traitor. They had kind of banked on popular sovereignty to bring slavery into the Kansas territory. The issue of bleeding Kansas will actually continue on into the Civil War, and it's not going to be until the Civil War actually starts that Kansas is admitted as a free state. The other big piece of this chapter is the Dred Scott case, and Dred Scott was a slave. He was born in Virginia. His master brings him to the Illinois and Wisconsin territory, and then returns him to St. Louis. Now, Dred Scott claims that basically by being here, he's free. And because he had spent so much time, his residency, on free soil. So he sues. Now, what happens is that the case will go all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court, they kind of take the case above and beyond. The simple ruling, which could have just been kind of the, just the cut and dry, would have been either yes, he's free, or no, he has to go back to slavery. But the Supreme Court takes it even further. And they said, one, Scott technically can't even sue because he is not a citizen. He does not have the same rights guaranteed to others by the Constitution because he was a slave. And that meant pretty much anyone who had been a slave and now was freed also were not entitled to those same guarantees. It also states that slaves were technically property, and therefore Scott was technically property. And of course they say in the Fifth Amendment, you can't take property without due process. And so this goes to say that Congress doesn't have the authority to say whether or not, you can't bring a slave into the territories. Technically, you could, because it was property, and you can't deprive somebody of their property. And so the federal government basically gets a huge blow on this. They have no authority to make a decision on this because it's property and they're infringing on that. It also pretty much throws the Missouri Compromise out the window because now you can bring those slaves above that line and it's property. It can't really be challenged. And it also meant that popular sovereignty at this point is almost null and void. So the Southerners, of course, will be quite happy about this ruling because it guarantees that you could expand slavery into the territories, and it was now protected. Buchanan will endorse it, while at the same time, kind of trying to walk the tightrope. So what we now are going to get into is the Lincoln-Douglas debates. And this is where we're going to see Lincoln make a name for himself, kind of get the recognition of the Republican Party. But this will also put the issue of popular sovereignty kind of into the spotlight. It had been, but with Lincoln and Douglas, that kind of becomes the focal point of their debate, and that's what we'll talk about tomorrow.